So what did you check out this month?
I watched Gold the Mazinger, or God Mazinger, from 1984, which was a one-season anime. Apparently, Mazinger is a series, or Mazinger, but this entry doesn't have anything to do with the other ones. It just has the same name, and they usually involve giant robots.
Yeah, I've seen this robot. I just looked it up.
This one was set in a fantasy version of, well, I mean, it's the Kingdom of Mu, which is kind of like the Eastern version of Atlantis. But it's basically a fantasy world where this kingdom is under siege from these bad guys that are resurrecting dinosaurs and using them to attack this kingdom.
So it's nonfiction.
Correct. And of course, the dinosaurs breathe fire, and they're, Godzilla-sized a lot of the time and have all these weird horns, and they don't look like real dinosaurs, but they're cool.
When are you going to tell me something I don't know that's not completely obvious?
And going with the Godzilla side, they used a lot of Toho monster roars, which was also cool. And basically, the Mazinger is this statue they have that will supposedly come to life according to a certain prophecy, but they need to fulfill the prophecy or whatever to have it come to life. And it involves them bringing in a Japanese kid from the future, from the present, back into the past. And he kind of pilots this statue turns into a robot, kind of, and he pilots it. From how it started, I expected it to have a lot more elaborate of a story as it went on, because you have your setup, and then they kind of... I was surprised at first that it wasn't just the characters are all the same thing, and it's always the same thing every episode. Given the time period, I expected it to be very episodic, but it does tell a long story and does kind of change as it goes on with the character relationships and stuff. So given once it started doing that, I expected there to be more complexity to the actual story. And I was disappointed that there wasn't. It's very straightforward. It doesn't really change that much as it goes on. But from a dinosaur monster fan perspective, it was really cool. I liked a lot of the weird dinosaur designs, and, hearing the Toho monster roars was cool. And of course it's Japanese, so it's very violent. You have the Mazinger pulls out a giant sword and just chops dinosaurs in half, and it's awesome. And people are getting chopped in half too. That's pretty much all that it is. You're either into that or you're not, and I liked it. I thought it was cool. It was the kind of Japanese thing where you're not supposed to ask a lot of questions. Things just kind of happen because of magic and because of fantasy and whatever. So there's not really a lot of explanation for anything. Even the way they're bringing the dinosaurs back was weird, because at first they're kind of doing like some kind of weird spell, and the dinosaurs just kind of pop up. But then later they go to a factory where they are constructing robotic dinosaurs, and then I guess they use magic to make them into real dinosaurs. So, I don't know, it's kind of two different explanations. It was the kind of thing where you could tell they were kind of making it up as they went along, which a lot of Japanese mangas do. I don't usually see that in anime as much unless the anime is based on a manga, but in this case, I know there was a manga, but I think the show, it was created as a show first, I think, but I could be wrong. But yeah, it was cool. I watched American Ninja 3 Blood Hunt from 1989.
All right. It's a good name.
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure out what that title means in relation to the movie.
Sounds like an Image character.
Yeah. So the main guy didn't come back. He wanted to keep his career options open in case American Samurai was getting made, or American Chef or whatever. So they got some other guy that was also not a great actor. Definitely still not as good as the guy in the first one, though. Or in the first two. And I know the main guy does come back for part 4. They did have Curtis Jackson back from the first two, who is the black sidekick character, and he's cool. I like his sense of humor and stuff. The bad guy was the main guy from The Food of the Gods, who's also the main guy in Star Crash.
Which guy was that?
The guy with like the frizzy hair that kept making like the grimacing expressions, and his name is Cobra, which was funny.
Cobra with a K?
I don't know. I never saw it written down.
Damn.
Actually, no. I think in the credits it's just Cobra with a C.
Lame.
It again is a canon movie, so it's unintentionally funny a lot of the time. There was one ninja woman whose special skill was to impersonate other people, and she wears face masks, like in the Mission Impossible movies, so that was really funny. If you like the first two, you'll like this one. It actually was a little bit disappointing at first. I thought the action wasn't great, and it was not that interesting, but once it got going, it basically is more of the same. I watched Nezura 1964, which was from 2020. This one was a dramatized depiction of the attempted making of a movie called Nezura back in 1964, which was going to be made by Daiei as their first monster movie back before they did Gamera, and it was going to be about giant rats. Again, Food of the Gods style. And they tried a bunch of different techniques to portray the rats, and they finally settled on just using real rats, which they would literally just pay people to... They sent out kind of a notice, like, we'll pay you if you bring in rats. And people just started bringing in rats. So it's a lot of miniature stuff, and it was cool that they actually kind of recreated... Like, they made miniatures for this movie and then had, like, rats going through the cities and stuff. But basically, the movie didn't end up getting made because they ran into a lot of issues with filming, and eventually they got shut down by the health department because rats were escaping and spreading fleas and stuff. So the movie didn't end up getting made. And I thought from the way this one was I feel like the way it was advertised back before it came out and the way it starts, I thought they were going to kind of do like a meta thing where after they try to make the movie and they fail, in real life what they did was they took all the rats and just burned them. They doused them in gas and lit them on fire. And they made it seem like doing that was going to create an actual giant rat monster. And I was hoping that's what was going to happen, but it turns out it's just kind of a hallucination vision kind of thing that happens at the beginning. So it's pretty much just a straight depiction of the making of the movie, or the attempted making of the movie. It was cool that they got some actors from Godzilla movies, and apparently the guy that played Ultraman was in it somewhere. I didn't see him. And they got some actors from the Gamera movies. But it's basically an independently produced movie, a Japanese movie. So it was cool. It was very much a fan thing of just, hey, it would be cool if we showed what happened and just kind of put it together. So I think it's only like an hour long. And I don't know, once it was done, I was kind of like, yeah, that was cool. I was hoping for a little bit more, but I don't know what more you could really put in it. So other than having a giant rat monster, which I was hoping for. I watched Raiders of the Lost Ark from 1981.
Okay.
So I wish I liked this movie more than I do. I get why so many people do like it. But given how much I like actual pulp adventure stuff from, the 20s and 30s, I wish I liked this more. I wish it was more of a straight, just new pulp adventure thing. But for me, I mean, you know how I feel about Spielberg. It's too Spielberg-y.
Yeah, I'm wondering how much of that is influencing your dislike of this movie.
Those are the things that I don't like about the movie, is the Spielberg-y things. It never lets you forget that you're watching a movie. It's always, hey, isn't this cool?
And the answer is always yes.
Yeah, but it would be cooler if you played it straight. I do think the movie has a perfect cast. I especially like the bad guys. The guy with the glasses and the guy that eats the fly.
Paul Freeman.
Yeah. I noticed...
Ivan Ooze, as he's known in the biz.
Oh, that's right. I noticed at the beginning, Indiana Jones says, I don't believe in magic. But then the following movie takes place before this one, which has a lot of magic in it. So, I don't know.
Yeah, welcome to common points brought up about these movies.
Okay.
You're so far behind the times.
Again, yeah, given that I'm not a huge fan of these movies, I don't follow I don't know all the behind the scenes stuff and whatever. Like I love Star Wars. I read a lot of behind the scenes stuff about Star Wars, but Indiana Jones, I can appreciate them. I do like this movie. I don't want to make it sound like I don't like it, and I totally get why other people like it so much, but it just doesn't, that tone, the winky tone of winking at the audience every 5 seconds, I don't like that.
I like this movie.
The setup of his fear of snakes has always annoyed me. It's so clumsy and doesn't make any sense that he doesn't know that this guy that he flew in with has a pet snake in the plane. Where was he hiding it before? How did he not know that it was in there? It's just dumb. Unless he was joking and it wasn't actually his pet snake and it was just a snake that he found and put in there. I don't know. The stuff at the dig site where somehow they don't notice that Indiana Jones and John Rhys Davies set up this whole other dig site right next to the one that they're already at, and they don't notice until they've already dug all the way in and gotten all the way to the bottom. That's pretty ridiculous. They could have at least had it be over a hill, on the other side of a hill, instead of right on top of the hill where they can clearly see everything. And the music is something that that is very much fits in with that winky tone, and I really don't like it. Every time that main heroic theme comes in, I just start rolling my eyes.
Well, isn't that intentional? That's indicative of the serials and stuff from way back in the day when they would do that. I'm pretty sure that's what John Williams said. That's why he did that. Okay, yeah, I mean, it fits with the movie. It fits with what they're trying to do with the movie. I just don't like what they're trying to do with the movie. I wish it was just a straight movie of here's Indiana Jones going on these adventures, instead of saying, hey, remember this stuff from back in the day, like, check it out, we're doing an updated version. It's like, just do an updated version. You don't have to keep telling people what you're doing while they're watching the movie. So that's what I don't like about it. If it was played straight, I probably would really like this movie a lot. Well, let me go on record and say I really like this movie a lot. Okay, and I do like it. I've seen it multiple times. I'm sure I will watch it again. And of course, the stuff at the end is awesome with the head exploding and all that kind of stuff, the face melting off. At one point, I had this candle of the guy with the glasses.
Oh, that's awesome.
And as it melted, yeah, it was like red and bloody, and it ended up just being a skull. It was really cool.
That's awesome. And it's been a while since I watched the other two. Well, because I haven't seen the newer ones.
Well, you're not missing out.
I remember liking The Last Crusade the most, and I think it's because, if I remember right, it doesn't do the winkiness that the first one does, and probably the second one. Definitely the second one.
I've seen the third one the least, and I'm pretty sure it still does that.
Okay, because I remember somebody was saying something about how it felt more like a real movie, like it had character drama in it, which they didn't want in an Indiana Jones movie. They said that's why I don't like the third one, because it feels more like it's trying to have more substance to it. And I think that's probably why I did like it more.
I remember it feeling very tired, because it rehashes a lot of stuff from the first one, and because it knows that, and because it's the third one, it's trying to make the events even bigger and more impressive than before.
Okay.
Like, in the first one, he's fighting against the Nazis and whatever, and in the third one, he literally comes face to face with Adolf Hitler at a giant Nazi parade.
Yeah, I'll try to watch those again, probably, the second and third ones. Maybe I'll even watch some of the other ones. Yeah, it's been too long since I've seen them. But I definitely, at the very least, I really, really like a lot of the effects.
Yeah, those CGI snakes were so cool.
I watched The House with Laughing Windows, which was an Italian movie from 1976.
That sounds like a fun comedy.
Yeah, this was the same director as Zedder, which I talked about before, which was really boring. Thankfully, this one was actually interesting the whole way through. So it was about a guy that goes to this... He gets called in to work at this church on restoring this painting that they found that supposedly was from like a famous artist around the area who would do a lot of paintings of people being murdered, basically. And as he is restoring the painting, it seems that he's going to uncover some kind of secret that's hidden in the painting that somebody doesn't want revealed, because people keep trying to sabotage him. You get a few murders that are committed, and so he's trying to figure out what's going on with that while also trying to work on the painting. There are a couple of twists in this movie that are pretty good, and like I said, it's pretty engaging the whole way through. The image of the house with laughing windows was actually pretty creepy. It's just a house with kind of like lips and mouths painted on the windows, but they look creepy. I don't know. They were cool. I don't even remember what the significance of the house was. I'm sure there were things in the movie that didn't make sense if I had sat down and said, wait a minute. But I honestly didn't think about it too much, because the very end of the movie disappointed me. When you find out everything that's going on, the reveals were fine, but the main character is just... he's an idiot, basically. And it kind of stopped me from liking the movie as much as I might have. And I don't want to spoil it, but the ending was a little bit disappointing. But if you're into Italian giallo movies, murder mystery movies, this one is not bad. I watched Pale Rider from 1985. This was a Clint Eastwood starring and directed movie that co-starred Michael Moriarty. We've talked about Michael Moriarty in Troll. Or actually, wait, I think that one's not monetizable. We talked about Michael Moriarty in The Stuff. So go watch that one instead.
Sweaty palms. Sweaty palms.
Yeah. If I had seen him in this movie first, I would have said that seems like just a normal guy. But thankfully I know better, because I've seen him in other things. I've also seen him in Q. I don't know. I've seen him in multiple other movies, and he's always a weirdo. But in here he seems pretty normal. So basically there are these people living in this area where they're prospecting for gold. And these guys keep coming in and wrecking their stuff and trying to drive them out. And they kill a dog. And this girl that owned the dog, she prays for a miracle, and Clint Eastwood shows up. I wasn't expecting all the religious elements where basically Clint Eastwood is death on the pale horse coming in to save them and kill all the bad guys. And that's basically what happens. It was a good movie, but I didn't like the fact that Clint Eastwood never, given that, I mean, partially because of the suggestions of a supernatural quality to him, he is never in any danger. There's never any sense that he might lose or he might fail. He's always going to win. He's always going to kill all the bad guys. Other people do die, but I think it kind of loses something by having a character that is so invincible like that. So it was a good movie. It was a well put together movie. The editing at the beginning was a little questionable, but it got better as it went on. Yeah, I don't know. It was definitely kind of weird for them to go that angle with it, but it wasn't bad. I watched Machete from 2010.
Okay.
So I had never seen this movie before.
Just saw the trailer.
Yeah.
In Grindhouse.
Which got me really excited. especially given that it's Robert Rodriguez doing that kind of movie again after Planet Terror and how awesome that was. It turns out he only co-directed this one.
Who was the other person?
Some guy, his editor or something. Which actually I thought the editing in this movie was not very good.
Because he's too busy directing.
I guess. It was disappointing because, A, it tries way too hard to be relevant, politically relevant, which is not what you want out of a movie like this.
Oh, man. Don't watch the second one then, because it's even worse.
Oh, man. Okay. And the other thing is, all of those over-the-top, goofy moments that you want, that, again, Planet Terror was full of, all of the ones in this movie were already in the trailer, so you've already seen all of them. So all the stuff in between just feels like you're just waiting for the next goofy, over-the-top thing to happen, and it just takes too long, and the stuff in between, again, is super political and just not interesting. There's a lot of big-name actors in this movie. Robert De Niro, I don't even remember anymore, other people. It was disappointing. I wanted more over-the-top goofiness. I wanted Machete to be more of a character, but he mostly just kind of stands there the whole time. Yeah, disappointing. Definitely, especially compared to Planet Terror. Planet Terror was so good, and that is not what we got here. And the fact that when they used those scenes from the trailer, in a lot of cases they used the actual footage that they shot for the trailer, and that footage doesn't match the footage for the movie that they're shooting now. So it was really weird. It was really jarring. And again, just made you say, oh, look at how cool this movie could be. And then you cut back to the footage for the actual movie, and you're like, yeah, okay. I watched Bad Times at the El Royale from 2018.
Oh, man, me too. All right, Let's talk about this.
So this was directed by Drew Goddard, who also did Cabin in the Woods. And I didn't love Cabin in the Woods, but I did like it a lot. It was a cool movie, so I expected to like this a lot more than I did. It was definitely very ambitious. It felt like something where when he kind of wrote it out, he was like, yeah, this movie's going to be awesome. And even when he made it, you can feel that he is thinking about everything, and he's doing it in a very deliberate way, the way he's putting the movie together, both kind of as the overall plot goes, and then also just each individual scene and the way they're shot. Some of it is cool. I think the movie has, for me, a few big problems. I think probably the biggest one being the pacing, because the movie is really slow, and there are so many scenes that go on for way too long. Would you agree with that?
Not entirely, because a lot of the scenes were shown from different perspectives.
Yeah, I think even those, went on a little too long, sometimes. I think it was mostly in the first third that I would say that, though.
Okay. I don't know, I felt like it kind of set up characters well enough.
Okay, because I was going to say another one of my problems was the character introductions. The movie expects you to already be invested in what's happening with these people on the screen, even if you don't know who they are, you don't know the significance of what they're doing, which makes it doesn't make what they're doing interesting until later when you actually know who they are.
Well, I felt like while it did introduce all of them, they all had a sense of mystery about them, like they were all hiding something.
It didn't make me want to know what was behind them. It didn't make them interesting. I didn't care about what was happening with them. Like when John Hamm is going through his room and looking for all the bugs and stuff, and it just goes on for literally 10 times longer than it needs to. And it's like, I get it. I get what he's doing, but I don't even know who he is or why he's doing this. But it expects me to be so intrigued just by the fact that he's looking for bugs, that he's clearly not who he says he is.
Okay, that scene did go on for a long time. But I was interested. I wanted to know why he was doing all that shit.
Okay, I was just waiting for the scene to be over and get to the next one. And again, especially in that first third, I felt like pretty much every scene at the beginning there, like the one before the opening titles. I don't know what this guy's doing. Why does this scene need to go on for 5 minutes of him, pulling up the floorboards and doing all this crap? I give me a reason to care about what's happening.
I'm sorry, Robert, this isn't TikTok. You're going to have to be patient.
Maybe if one of the characters at the beginning had been kind of a little bit more open to the audience, for the audience to kind of side with the character. I feel like they kind of tried to do that with the singer, but I don't know, it didn't quite work for me. I wasn't invested in anything that was happening. I was watching it as an outsider the whole time, or at least in the first half. The other note that I had of something that I felt like didn't work is it kind of fits the same overall thing, which is the music. A lot of the music in scenes where characters are doing stuff and the music is just like a song is playing over it, a lot of it is very kind of upbeat and supposed to be like quirky and give like a sense of uniqueness and fun to the movie, but it felt like it was trying too hard. And again, those scenes went on for too long.
Well, I'm going to point out that I did some background reading after I watched the movie, and Drew Goddard wrote the movie with those songs in mind and went to studios saying, if you can't pay to license these songs, then don't even bother. So the music was a huge part of the movie, even before the movie was finished.
I mean, it obviously plays a big part when it comes to the singer. And I liked the scene where she's singing and they're kind of behind the walls and other stuff is going on. That was cool, but just it was a little too in your face with, hey, look at how clever this is, look at how unique this is.
Well, I think that's Drew Goddard.
Maybe. I feel like you might have gotten that from Joss Whedon too. It's a little too in your face with everything like that. I feel like if it was made by somebody that had a little bit more subtlety, I think it could have been a lot better.
Yeah, there was very little subtlety in this movie.
Yeah, and I mean, I didn't hate it or anything. I thought it was interesting.
Yeah, I liked it.
I don't know if I'd say I liked it either, though. I was kind of like, yeah, it was interesting. I'm glad I watched it.
I'm sorry there couldn't be more Indiana Jones or snakes or whatever you wanted in this movie.
It had all the pieces there to be a much better movie than it turned out to be, I think is what it was. And the actors are really good. All the actors do a good job in the movie. The cinematography is really good.
I thought the symbolism was just rampant in this thing.
What do you mean?
That line in the middle of the hotel and the way all the characters react to that line.
I mean, that was early on in the movie where I was just like, get to the next scene, so I don't know.
No, but it's even throughout the whole rest of the movie.
Okay, I probably was not, well, no, I'll tell you, I was not paying attention that closely because I was just kind of like, yeah, whatever.
Okay, well, you know.
What did you feel about Chris Hemsworth's character coming in pretty late in the movie?
I thought that part was too much of the movie. And that was, what, the last third, probably?
Yeah.
I felt like that took over, and that's when I kind of started to lose interest, when it just kept going with all of that.
It felt like it turned into a completely different movie at that point.
Yeah. Like instead of, up until that point, all these characters had their little segmented backstories and parts, and then when it got to that took over the entire thing, all of the other characters.
Yeah, it puts them all on the same side, basically, at that point, and they're all kind of dealing with the same thing.
Yeah, like I liked before how they kind of just nibbled at each other's stories.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the fact that I wasn't super into it in the first place, I don't know, I just kind of went along with it, but it definitely felt a little out of place. I watched Trucks from 1997.
Okay, what is Trucks?
We've both seen Maximum Overdrive, which was based on Stephen King's short story, which was called Trucks.
Okay.
This is also based on Stephen King's short story, which is called Trucks. And I'm half convinced that Stephen King also directed this version and then took his name off of it so that he could say, hey, look, I didn't direct the worst version of Trucks. Because this was actually worse than Maximum Overdrive. This was a USA Network original movie, so it was a TV movie with some of the worst acting I've ever seen. The music felt like they couldn't afford Richard Band, so they went with kind of the next lowest guy. There's some very cheesy piano stuff in there where, in the first Terminator, when you first see Sarah Connor and she's riding the bike and you have kind of like the happy, jaunty music and it's like, oh, look, everything's ideal and whatever, which doesn't really make sense for her character anyway, but yeah, that's kind of what they did. Imagine that, but turned up to like 2000 at multiple points in the movie when they kind of just show the town and it's like, oh, look at how happy everything is, but it's literally just people walking around like going about their lives.
So it took whoever did the music so much time and resources to make that one little musical clip that they said, let's just use this as many times as possible.
I guess so. And it's funny too because it comes in between scenes of people getting killed by cars or whatever, or trucks. And then you cut to the town and it's like, oh, look at how happy everything is. It doesn't work. It was laughable.
See, that could be funny if it was intentional.
Yeah.
But it seems like it was not like that.
Right. It was funny, but yeah, not in an intentional way. The acting was really good, really funny. They kept having characters say that things were weird when they weren't weird. There's a scene where a bunch of characters are in a car and they're driving by and they see a truck on the side of the road and they're like, oh, that's really weird. Why is there a truck on the side of the road? And it's like, why wouldn't there be a truck on the... Have you ever like taken a long drive through a desert and not seen a truck on the side of the road? It happens. But these characters are like, why? That's so strange. And then the next time something happens, it's like, why did that truck do a U-turn up there? Because people take wrong turns sometimes. It happens. But that happens so many times in the movie. It was so dumb. Just kind of as a way of saying, like, hey, look at how weird things are. Okay, so basically the story is trucks come to life and start killing people. That's the story. No explanation. at least Maximum Overdrive had a goofy, like 50s sci-fi explanation. This one, I don't think they explain anything in this movie. The funniest part was apparently remote control vehicles also come to life, and a character actually gets killed by a remote controlled truck, just like a small, like ankle high truck.
How so? Does it have like razors attached to it or something?
No. He's on a sidewalk, and it keeps like running into his feet.
Oh, so he's outside. He's not even trapped.
Right. And he can't just, kick it or get out of the way, or step on it, walk away faster than it's moving. Somehow it keeps hitting him and he falls over, and then it just keeps smashing into his face until he's dead. And he can't just like put his hand out or do something, roll over. He dies.
I mean, it's a plastic toy.
Yeah. So I've never seen a character in a movie that deserved to die so much just for their sheer incompetence at not dying. So yeah, that was the best part. The ending was pretty funny too, but again, it wasn't supposed to be. Yeah, definitely a terrible, terrible movie. So if you thought Maximum Overdrive was bad, you should probably watch this movie because it's even worse. I watched Return of the Vampire from 1944. This was an attempt to cash in on the success of the Bela Lugosi Dracula by having Bela Lugosi play another vampire and call it Return of the Vampire. At the beginning of the movie, he has like a familiar guy that he turns into a werewolf. So the guy's not an actual werewolf. He just like looks like a werewolf and is kind of like hypnotized by the vampire. And I was really surprised when I was watching it because the first 15 minutes is almost like a mini movie in itself, where it's like, oh, we found out that there's a vampire and we have to go kill it, and then they kill him, and it's 15 minutes in. And then the rest of the movie is skipping ahead a few years. It's during World War II, so there's the vampire is in a coffin in the cemetery with a stake through his heart, and the cemetery gets bombed, and the coffin gets unearthed, and these guys that are in there repairing everything, they see this coffin with a stake sticking out of it. They assume it got stuck in there from the explosions, and they pull it out, and he ends up rising from the grave, and goes and finds his familiar, who at this point is just a normal guy again, and turns him back into a werewolf. And yeah, it pretty much goes how you expect. The people that found out that he was a vampire the first time, or this one woman, which for the time period was interesting that it was a woman that nobody was believing, that she was like, yeah, I know this guy's a freaking vampire. We need to go kill him again. Some of the cinematography was cool. They were clearly going for that Universal Monsters look and feel, even though it was some other studio. And I'm pretty sure it was a lower budget too, but they did a good job of replicating all that. And I would say it was better than most Dracula movies. I mean, some of the adaptations of Dracula are good, but most of the sequels of those are terrible. This one was not bad. I mean, it's not technically a Dracula movie, but it was okay. If you're a fan of the Universal monster movies, I would say check it out. I watched King Kong and Friends, which, as far as I can tell, is from 1990. I'm not 100% sure about that. You remember that Field Guide to Monsters book I talked about and how terrible it was?
Yeah.
This is essentially the documentary version of that. It's somebody putting together a really inaccurate and poorly narrated description of giant gorillas in movies and stuff, and then it goes into a montage of trailers from different movies. And apparently they couldn't find enough gorilla movies, so they threw in dinosaurs and stuff like that too, and giant bugs. Yeah, it was really bad. The trailers are cool. Most of them I had seen before. You do get there's a little bit of behind-the-scenes stuff from Planet of the Apes, which was really cool, seeing them make like the makeups and stuff like that. I think that was the very last thing in the whole thing. But the narration and the writing for the narration were so terrible that I was just irritated the whole time. So yeah, I would say skip it and just go watch King Kong and some other actual movies. I read The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin, which was from 1969. Have you read this before?
No.
Okay. Going in, I was worried that it was going to be very preachy and just hitting you over the head with messages, because I knew the idea was you have this planet where people are genderless, but they can go from male to female. And I thought it was at will, but it turns out they have no say in it. Every month for a few days, they will transform into either a man or a woman, and they never know what it's going to be. And it turns out that's just kind of the background setting for the whole thing. That's the planet that it takes place on, is that's what the people that live here are like. But really, it was basically like a political, not political in the modern sense, but like political intrigue kind of movie, with kind of an adventure overtone to the whole thing. It reminded me of two things. It reminded me of Dune, because you have a main character who is coming to this very inhospitable planet. In the case of Dune, it's a desert planet. In this case, it's a really cold planet. And he's trying to figure out the culture and kind of learn what everything means and why people are the way they are. There's a lot of cultural misunderstandings and trying to figure things out. And again, you have the political intrigue of different factions trying to fight each other and gain power and do different kinds of stuff like that, and not really knowing what people are really up to and kind of what they really stand for and stuff like that. And there's a long sequence where the two main characters are traveling across the wilderness, basically, and trying to survive. In Dune, you have Paul and his mom out in the desert, and here you have the two main characters traveling across glaciers and stuff. And the other thing it reminded me of was TNG, because the main character, his entire role in the story is trying to get these people to basically join the Federation. And just like with TNG, he is a terrible person to send on this mission, because at the start of the book, he's already been there for like 2 years, but he still keeps expecting this alien race that is completely different from his own to conform to his own expectations of how they're going to act and what they're going to do and stuff like that. He's an idiot, basically. And I think she kind of did that on purpose to make them feel more alien and at the beginning of the book, just like with Dune, you have a lot of weird terms that you're like, I don't know what that means. I don't know what they're talking about. And it felt like she did that on purpose to kind of throw you in and say, hey, look at how alien this culture is. You're going to have to figure things out along with the main character, figure out what people are talking about and kind of how things relate to each other. It reminded me of A Clockwork Orange a little bit like that too, where you kind of are learning the language as it goes on. I really, really liked it. It was really, really good. The adventure aspects were good. The cultural stuff was good. Just like with Dune, it felt like a very real environment and a very real society that she built in this book. And it was not preachy at all. I really liked it. Even the kind of exploration of the way those people, of kind of how their genders work, was interesting from like a sci-fi perspective. And it doesn't really make up that much of the book. It's kind of more of just an element of how different these people are from us, from humans. And I know it takes place in a world that she had already established in other stories, not this specific planet, but the overall universe. So I'm definitely interested in checking out other stuff by her. I think this is the only thing I've ever read by her. And I actually wasn't sure if I had read it before. It was kind of a weird experience because as I was going on, I was thinking a lot of this feels familiar, but I'm not sure if I've read it. And I'm still not sure if I had read it before. If I had, it was a long time ago. But I really liked it. I read a lot of Edgar Allan Poe stuff. I was mostly going through the Essential Tales and Poems, which is an old Barnes & Noble Classics edition. I know they have a new edition that has different contents in it, and thankfully different notes and different introduction, because the guy that wrote these, Benjamin F. Fisher, is the most pretentious, just idiot that I've ever encountered outside of our own videos. He'll say things like, most Poe scholars will say this, but really what I think and what I figured out myself is this. And then he'll tell you his revelation or whatever, and he'll say, yeah, there's a reason nobody else suggested that because it's so idiotic and so just ridiculous. He would say something like, the characters in these stories have middle names that start with the letter E, so that must mean that whatever. And it's like, it's just drawing conclusions that do not exist, making, creating symbolism out of nothing. It was absurd.
Maybe you're just not smart enough to understand.
No, this guy was really dumb. He also doesn't know how to write footnotes because a lot of his footnotes spoil the story, the ending of the story that you're reading. Oh man, that made me so mad. He did that so many times. And I should have learned my lesson, but I read this book. I've been reading this book for a few months and some other stuff that wasn't in the book. I looked up a few other stories and articles that he wrote, and I came to the conclusion that Edgar Allan Poe is not a horror writer, and he wasn't trying to be a horror writer. And I don't think he should be classified as a horror writer. Most of his stuff is either outright comedic or is satirical or even kind of parodying standard horror stuff. He does have a few stories that seem like a bit more of just kind of straight horror stories or supernatural stories. I still wouldn't call a lot of them horror stories. I remember back when I tried to read these in high school. Well, I read a bunch of them in high school, and at the time I was disappointed because so many of them feel kind of the same. They have a lot of people being buried alive, a lot of beautiful young girls that the protagonist is in love with dying young, a lot of reincarnation themes, a lot of illness, lots of tombs. And some of that, I'm sure, did have to do with his... I've also been reading a biography of him that I'll talk about probably next month. Hopefully I'll finish it. I know he had a lot of stuff going on in his life with illness and stuff like that and people dying young. But a lot of his stories, it feels like he's kind of... I don't know if I'd say that he's trying to, make fun of his audience, but it feels like he's trying to see what he can kind of get away with in his stories as trying to pass them off as legit, straight stories. Because a lot of his quotations that he sticks in are either like from other writers or from other sources or whatever. A lot of them are either misquoted, misattributed, or sometimes just made up altogether. And sometimes he'll even throw in fake names of authors and stuff like that that he's supposedly referencing. And my favorite things in the book was a pair of stories, I guess, where the first one was called How to Write a Blackwood Article, and the second one was called A Predicament. The first one is about this woman that goes to the editor at Blackwood, which was the magazine that he was publishing a lot of his stories in. And she says, how do I get a story in here? And he says, basically, what it comes down to is put yourself in a situation where you're going to die, and then write about it in detail, and that'll make a really good story. And he starts pulling books off the shelves, and he says, he opens one up, and he says, like, stick in a quote from a famous person, it'll make you seem smart. And then he opens another one, and he says, stick in a quote in, like, another language, it'll make you seem smart. And then stick in a reference to some obscure cultural thing from the other side of the planet, it'll make you seem smart. And he gives her a bunch of examples. And then he there's a lot of other, it's a very satirical thing, it's really funny. And he just goes through all this stuff, and at the end she's like, okay, I'm going to go write my story. So the second part, A Predicament, is the story that she writes, which basically ends up with her walking up into a clock tower and sticking her head out of the face of the clock through like a maintenance opening, and she gets decapitated by the hands of the clock. So she's writing this story about what that experience was like. And she talks about like her eyeballs popping out and staring back at her in disdain at the idea that somebody could be so stupid to get themselves into this kind of situation. It's really, really funny. Again, super, super satirical, super just outright humorous, and it was great. And the whole time she keeps doing the things that the editor told her to do. So he gave her these examples of quotations and references and stuff, and she sticks them in the story in places where it doesn't make any sense, and she gets them completely wrong in ways that are also really funny. It was great. I loved that whole 2-part thing. It was really funny. And all the stuff that he talks about in How to Write a Blackwood Article is exactly the stuff he was doing in his own stories. He writes stories about people that are buried alive and all that kind of stuff, and throwing in all the references and everything. It's the exact stuff that he's doing in his own stories. And just like the way she gets everything wrong, he's kind of making things up sometimes. But he's doing it on purpose, I think, to see whether people will pick up on it or not, or if they'll just kind of take it straight. So yeah, I think a lot of what have been over the years regarded as kind of classic horror stories, I don't think are horror stories. I think they're kind of supposed to be satirical. And just as an example of, because this was a story I really, probably my other favorite story, a way that the image of Poe in pop culture is completely wrong. The Telltale Heart was great. Everybody should read it. It's like 5 pages long. But the pop culture image that we have of that story is it's about a guy that murders someone and that is so driven by guilt that he, admits to his crime. But that is not what the story is about. That doesn't even happen in the story. Somehow that's kind of how things have been twisted over the years because people don't actually read the original stories.
5 pages, you said?
Yeah.
Is there like an abridged version?
I'm sure there probably is, and they probably twist things around like this. That whole story is a comedy story. It is not a horror story. It's about a guy that's trying to convince you that he's not crazy by getting up on a table and waving his arms around and saying, hey, would a crazy person do this? And he goes into detail about how he killed this guy, saying a crazy person wouldn't be smart enough to do this, to do it like this, and going into all these things of what he did. And that's the story. It's funny because the guy is trying to convince you that he's not crazy by telling you how crazy he is. And that's what it is. And that's what a lot of his stories are. They're outright comedic. Again, he does have some stories that are more straight horror. Right? There are a few, but compared to everything else that he wrote, I feel like that's a very small percentage. And it is clear that he was interested in the detective side of things. He does have some, just a few detective stories. Even those, Murders on the Rue Morgue, feels like it's supposed to be funny because I don't want to spoil. I won't spoil it for people that haven't read it. But the revelation of who committed the murders is not what you would ever expect. And I think he did that on purpose because he was like, hey, this would be so funny if I have all this buildup and then you find out that this is what it was. Yeah, I would recommend checking that out too. It's a little bit too long, I think. And I've seen even quotes from Poe about his ideas behind writing presented straight. And then when I went back and I read, he has a piece called The Philosophy of Composition, which is, again, complete satire of his ideas of how you should write a story or a poem. And quotes from that piece pop up as actual kind of writing advice from Poe, but he's purposely being ridiculous in that piece. Even right at the beginning, he basically says, no writer can tell you in detail how they came up with something, how they came up with every line of a story or every line of a poem. And he goes into this, there's like a whole paragraph about that. And then at the end he says, except me, I can do it, and I'm about to do it. And then he does it. But again, in a very over-the-top, ridiculous way where it is clearly not how he came up with the Raven in this case. And I know he did want to be known more for his poetry, and the Raven is awesome. That is again something I would recommend that everybody read. The Raven is incredibly cool. The Bells was another one that was really cool, another poem. Yeah, his poetry is a bit more legit. It's him actually just doing what he's doing. There's no he's not trying to, at least I don't know. I guess maybe because I read most of the poems before I read the stories. Maybe some of them are also satirical. I don't know. But definitely the pop culture image of Poe is completely wrong. He was more of a humor writer than a horror writer for sure, like times a million. And yeah, I'm reading Mystery of Mysteries, The Death and Life of Edgar Allan Poe, and it's a pretty good biography so far. So I'm interested to see how it turns out. Hopefully I'll talk about that next month. We'll see, because I keep having to check it out from the library, but I'm always reading other things, so I never get it done. I beat Resident Evil 3.
The remake?
Yes. I've never seen anybody say anything good about this game. They all talk about how it's a quick cash-in, how it cuts out so much from the original game, how it's a big disappointment compared to Resident Evil 2. I think I liked it more than Resident Evil 2 overall.
What a surprise.
Yeah, whatever. I think there's a couple reasons why people prefer 2, I think. One of them is the police station section is really good, and you don't really get something like that in 3, which was also true for the original 2 and 3. And Mr. X was so good in Resident Evil 2, and I was wondering how they were going to top that with, or even try to top that with Nemesis in 3, and the answer is they didn't even try. In 2, Mr. X actually does follow you around the police station, and you legitimately have to try to get away from him. And like he actually does search through the game. It's not all scripted stuff. Once you get out of the police station, though, he does appear only in scripted locations, and everything after the police station in 2 was not great. Thankfully, everything in 3 is better than everything that came after the police station in 2, but nothing is as good as the police station was in 2. And for Nemesis, he is 100% scripted in this game. He doesn't follow you around. He doesn't do any of that. He just pops up at specific locations. I guess he does follow you around in those scenes, but there's specific scripted sequences. It feels like it's trying really hard to be a big action movie, especially with those sequences. A lot of them are areas where you have a very clear path that you're supposed to run through. And I mean, I don't like those sequences. There's no real gameplay involved. You're pretty much just running forward and that's it. Because it is very clear where you're supposed to go, just go. You don't actually have to do anything. The boss fights are pretty good though, for the most part. But yeah, Nemesis was really disappointing. Even his design is disappointing compared to the original. And it's clear that the creators didn't understand how Nemesis worked in-game in the original, because in the original, as he regenerates, he mutates. Every time he regenerates parts that are damaged, they kind of come back a little different. And partway through the game, you kind of melt half of him off with acid. And when he regenerates, he's completely, like, his ribs are sticking up out of his back because his whole body is swapped around and stuff like that. But in this game, he just mutates randomly. It's just like, oh, it's a monster, he's just going to mutate. They completely changed the way that works. And it doesn't even feel like Nemesis anymore. Halfway through the game, he doesn't look anything like Nemesis. He's on all fours and running around like a dog or something. So yeah, that is completely different from the original. I was surprised, given how much people complained, at how similar certain parts of it are to the original, how many things they kept in. But the original already structurally wasn't as strong as 2 or 1. It felt a lot looser. A lot of it is wandering around the city. I think they improved the wandering around the city in the remake, because it feels a lot more like opening up different areas and going back and forth and doing things in a way that makes sense. And the zombies are still good like they were in 2. But like I said last time, they added in a dodge feature, which they also did in the original. And that improves the gameplay. I think it has better gameplay than 2. Being able to mash X when you get attacked, I'm not really sure how that works, because I always do it, but you still get bitten. I assume you just don't get bitten as much or don't take as much damage as if you don't push X. It doesn't feel like it's trying to be a horror game. I think maybe that's something that also disappointed people. 2 at least felt like it was trying to be scary. 3 feels like it's just straight up action. The storytelling in both of them is terrible. All the cutscenes are really stupid. All the characters are really dumb. There are so many things that don't make any sense. I found a whole video comparing the remake of 2 to the original 2, and I agreed with pretty much everything they said. Yeah, they went into detail about how all those story beats and just all the cutscenes don't make any sense in the remake of 2, and they are very right. And for 3, the same thing. The characters are so dumb. And again, the cutscenes, when there are so many cutscenes where Jill is fighting Nemesis and she gets away from him so easily, so many times. And again, it just makes him seem so weak. So that was weird. He is easier to fight too, most of the time when you're fighting him in the game. I'm playing through it again on hard, and even then, it's still pretty easy. But yeah, overall, I mean, the improvements in the gameplay and the fact that everything after the police station in 2 was so boring. Every area was so either convoluted when it came to the sewers or just so spread out with the sewers and the lab, completely needlessly spread out. There are hallways that are really long or walkways that are really long just to be like, hey, look at how big this area is. But you don't actually do anything. All you do is run through it. There's nothing there. And it's so repetitive. 3 feels like it just feels better designed when it comes to each individual area like that. Because there's a whole sewer area in here too, but it doesn't feel tedious. It doesn't feel boring. Yeah, I liked it overall better than 2. Even the whole playing as both characters in 2 didn't. It still, they both felt the same. It felt like the same game again, basically. But playing through 3 again, I am disappointed that playing it on hard, everything is pretty much the same as normal. I was hoping for something like 7, where it feels like they changed everything up. They didn't do that at all. Even though the item placement is all the same, I think you just get less ammo and enemies are harder. I think that's about it. But I don't know. The fact that I like it enough to play through it again. It's still not great. It's still stupid. I still wouldn't especially recommend it. But it's fun enough that I'm playing it again. And I don't feel like I would want to go back and play 2 again. I feel like I would get bored pretty quickly. So yeah, I guess I'm like you said, you're not surprised that I disagreed with the majority of people on this one. But I was surprised. I thought this game was really going to suck. And it's not great. But it's not as bad as people make it sound, especially with how good they talk about 2. I think that's where I disagree, is that 2 is not as good as a lot of people say. And then I've been playing Breath of the Wild. I don't have anything to say about it. I'm probably halfway through my play, I think, of it. And I can already feel that I'm not going to want to keep unlocking stuff or doing more side quests and stuff. I feel like once I finish the main game, I'm going to be like, yeah, that was fun. And that's going to be it for that.
All right.
And that's all I did this month. So what did you check out?
That's all you did this month. That was a shit ton of stuff.
Yeah.
I watched Mr. Nice Guy from 1997, which is a Jackie Chan movie.
That one is set in Australia, right?
Yeah. So this is typical mid-90s Jackie Chan stuff where he just goes to different places in the world and the movies are really poorly dubbed or the ADR work is just not good. And in this one, he plays a television chef.
Oh, yeah.
And there's this reporter, and she has this tape of a drug deal going down or something, and it gets mixed in with Jackie's tapes of his show. And so he gets thrust into this whole criminal element thing.
Do they still speak with Australian accents, or did they dub them into American accents?
Some people have Australian accents.
Okay, it's been a long time since I've seen this movie.
Yeah, it was not one of his better ones. And usually, for movies of his that aren't great, you can still bank on the fight scenes being pretty good. But even those, not all of them were good. There was one really good construction site one, but the acting was not good. The story was not great. The humor didn't really work. Pretty throwaway. I watched They Cloned Tyrone from 2023. Have you seen anything on this movie?
I know it's an original from something, and that's all I know.
It's a Netflix movie. And it's about 3 characters in a shitty part of town who all lead less than reputable lives. The main character is a drug dealer, and he gets shot and killed. But the next day, he wakes up perfectly fine. And the other 2 main characters, it freaks them out because they saw his dead body. And so they go to investigate because he can't remember anything that happened. And their investigation leads them to this whole secret government cloning and mind control operation in their neighborhood, which was unexpected, but the movie was good. It was definitely a comedy, and I liked it. The chemistry between the main cast was really good, their dialogue was really good, and their acting was really good. And the main cast is John Boyega, Jamie Foxx, and Teyonah Parris, who I had just seen in that Candyman movie too. It was a definite example of using science fiction to present social issues, which is nothing new, but those did not overshadow the actual story and events of the movie, so it worked. It's definitely worth a watch. I watched Mortal Kombat from 1995. We've talked about this movie before. We've done a whole video on this movie before, so I'm not going to go into that. You can go watch that if you want. And the only reason I watched it is because somebody had not seen it. And I was like, all right. I watched Mank from 2020, which is a David Fincher movie that focuses on the life of Herman Mankiewicz during his time writing the movie Citizen Kane. So it takes place during the 30s and 40s. There's flashbacks. It's not chronologically in order. And it's shot in black and white. But it was actually shot in black and white, not like we shot it normally and then did a bunch of digital stuff after the fact. Gary Oldman plays Mankiewicz, who everyone calls Mank, and he does a good job. And in addition to what was going on in his life, it covers the relationship between the screenplay for Citizen Kane and real-life figures and the implications and repercussions of this movie being made because it would upset the establishment. And it also covered how the screenplay in general was more complex and different than what was thought it needed to be successful. And how eventually at the end he pushed for credit when originally his deal said he didn't want any credit or he wouldn't receive any credit. And it was a good movie. It was clear that David Fincher was in heaven making this movie.
He died?
Not yet. There's a lot of focus on not just making things period accurate, but him just reveling and getting to tell a story from this era. The dialogue is very snappy, everything is very stylized, sometimes to a fault, but you can tell that he was really enjoying himself. And this isn't a movie I would normally check out, but I'm glad I did. I watched Enter the Fat Dragon from 2020.
I can already imagine how much I would probably hate this movie. I can just assume from the title.
No, but see, let me talk here. So this is not a remake of the Sammo Hung movie, also titled Enter the Fat Dragon from the 70s, even though at one point it was going to be, but then they decided not to. So it's Donnie Yen. I like Donnie Yen. And he is this gung-ho police officer whose dedication to justice and the job eventually causes too many problems for the department, and he's relegated to the evidence room in the basement. And his girlfriend breaks up with him because he just can't stop living the job. And all of this causes him to give up on his intense workout and dietary habits, and he eats a lot and becomes fat. And then he is then assigned to a case in Japan, which he jumps on. And he, through the course of events, regains his sense of confidence by forging new friendships, learning more about himself, and fighting the Yakuza as a fat guy. The humor didn't really work. It was hit and miss. And while some of the characters were entertaining to watch, the relationship between Yen and his girlfriend felt non-existent. They didn't even seem to like each other, let alone care about each other. And they had these conversations where they might as well have been in separate rooms just talking to a wall. So that whole arc didn't really work of like, oh, I need to get back together with her. And the whole thing repeatedly poked at Japan to the point of being kind of a jerk about it. The fight choreography and the scenes were pretty good, and they definitely got better towards the end. But the biggest question mark in this whole movie was, why is Donnie Yen fat? Why did he have to be fat? Because there was no point in him being fat for this movie. The whole movie could have happened with this whole downfall and rebirth of character without him being fat. Nobody addressed him being fat. It's not like he incorporated food into his fighting, or his weight precluded him from being a more effective fighter, or made him a more effective fighter. I think he says one time to himself in the middle of a fight, I could stand to lose some weight. And then he continues the fight. And that's it. That was the only point in the entire movie where him being fat was part of the movie. He wasn't slow or sluggish. He was still Donnie Yen, zipping all over the place, jumping off of buildings, beating the shit out of people at top speed. It was really weird that this gimmick didn't actually contribute anything to the movie. But it was the title of the movie. And all of the promotional stuff just shows him in a fat suit.
How bad did it look?
I'll put up pictures. I watched another movie I probably wouldn't normally watch. I watched Fast 9 from 2021, which is part of the Fast and Furious franchise. Have you seen any of these?
I saw the first one in theaters, and I thought it was dumb. And then I saw most of the second one on TV, and I loved it from a bad movie perspective.
Okay, I haven't seen any of these. This was the first one, which was probably a mistake to watch the 9th one first. Or 10th, I'm pretty sure some spin-offs in there. And I've heard a lot about them. And from what I gather, they start as car heist movies with fast driving and standard action stuff. Is that what you got from the first two?
Yeah. I mean, the first one was trying to be a real movie. It was just dumb. The second one was also trying to be a real movie, but trying to be hip and cool. And that's where it was unintentionally really funny.
Okay. Well, eventually, it evolves into what this movie is, which is completely over the top and ridiculous, going all over the world, having things happen that could never happen in real life. And I found it interesting that there's one character in this iteration that keeps talking about how none of the shit they're experiencing is normal, and that they should all constantly be killed. There's no reason any of them should be alive. And it seems like, and people who have watched these movies can confirm, the recipe of these movies is to have crazy intense stuff going on, having the characters act like it's even more intense than that, getting into stare-downs with other characters before dropping one-liners and scene changes, and then driving really fast and blowing things up while making jokes before they make it out on top. And right before the credits roll, an unexpected character appears. And since they've made so many of these now, they have this whole stable of characters to keep bringing back. So if that's accurate, please let me know.
Yeah, it seems like the newer ones are a lot more about the actors, whereas back when I saw the first one, like, nobody knew who those actors were.
Vin Gasoline, or whatever his name was. This one did not entice me to watch any of the other ones, but for some people, there is nothing they look forward to more than a new installment of this series. It's turned into straight comic book stuff. And I would imagine there's some hardcore bros out there who live and die by these movies, but shit all over Marvel and DC movies saying those are dumb. They're full of dumb plots and unrealistic characters and things that could never happen. And then they go watch Fast 10 or Fast X or whatever the hell it's called and say this is the greatest movie I've ever seen.
I mean, you're accurately describing Jason Statham because that's how he talks about those superhero movies, but then he's in those movies.
That doesn't make any sense.
And I will say, my dad saw the first one, and he's a big car guy, and that's what he didn't like about the movies, that all the car stuff is apparently all just made up shit.
I watched Amadeus from 1984, which is a long-ass movie, if you're not aware, and it covers a mostly fictional imagining of Mozart's adult life and his rivalry with Antonio Salieri, which did not actually happen in real life. And the whole movie is told from an old Salieri's perspective after he claims to have killed Mozart. And the movie is good. Got a lot of acclaim when it came out, but looking back through a modern lens, it's fine.
Who does the makeup?
Dick Smith. I thought that was cool. And looking at the main dude, I always think of Mark Hamill. And I did some background reading, and Mark Hamill actually auditioned for this part. I watched a movie called In the Shadow of the Moon from 2019. Which is a science fiction movie about a police detective who encounters mysterious deaths where people bleed out of every orifice in their body and just their brains collapse. And the only suspect he has is this girl, and she disappears. But then 9 years later, the same types of deaths happen, and the same girl is there, but she does not appear to have aged. And it happens every 9 years, and he eventually kind of goes crazy, has all of these theories and shit, and he just is waiting. His whole life revolves around waiting every 9 years for this girl to appear again. And it turns out it's a time travel thing, and she's actually supposed to be the good guy, and in typical cliche fashion, she is directly related to him as part of his family from the future. And it was interesting until they started to explain things. So maybe 20, 25 minutes, I was intrigued, and then it was like, yeah, all right, just standard sci-fi cliche stuff. Then I yawned and struggled to make it to the end. I watched Mr. Harrigan's Phone from 2022, which is based on a Stephen King story, pretty sure titled the same thing. So there's this kid who is hired by this reclusive billionaire to sit and read books to him out loud, and he gets paid to do it. And he gets fine with it, and as he gets older, they eventually start to talk about the books and what they mean and become kind of friends, and the story takes place at the advent of smartphones. So everyone has phones, but the kid can't afford a phone, but then he gets a phone, and eventually he gets the billionaire an iPhone, who is initially very dismissive, but then realizes he can look at stocks in real time, so he's all about it.
Relatable.
Yeah, and eventually he dies, and at the funeral, the kid slips the iPhone into the billionaire's pocket before they put him under the ground. And he keeps going on with his life and runs into kid stuff, and at one point he encounters his bully, and the bully beats the shit out of him. So the kid calls the billionaire's phone to vent, and the next day the bully is dead.
Okay, somebody was telling me about this story, and I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. It must be a Stephen King story I haven't read, but now I know which one it was.
And later, there's this teacher that the kid really likes, who is killed by a drunk driver, but the drunk driver gets off pretty easy, so the kid calls the phone, again, to vent. And then the next day, the drunk driver is dead. And eventually, the kid realizes that he shouldn't do that, and then it's over. Just like fairy tale, that relatively recent Stephen King book. The most interesting part of this movie and the story was seeing these two characters coming from two different worlds forging this friendship. And again, what happened after the older character died was not really that interesting. It felt like a completely different story that wasn't as good. This is not a horror movie. It's definitely more of a coming-of-age movie. And it's got the kid from It, who, until he has a big break...
There were like 8 kids in It.
The main kid, Bill.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And until that kid has a big breakout role as an adult, he's always going to be that kid from It.
Yeah, that sounds pretty much like what the other guy told me too.
And it's advertised as a horror movie just because it's Stephen King, but it's not really a horror movie. I haven't read the story for a while, and I don't remember enough of it to compare to this movie, but it felt pretty small, like a Saturday morning movie. I watched Kindergarten Cop 2.
Oh. Is that Dolph Lundgren?
Yeah. So this is 2016. I want you to imagine all the beats of Kindergarten Cop, but I want you to remove all of the stuff that kids and families watching it would watch it for. It is a politically driven comedy, and that's in quotes. I also found out they're making a 4th Expendables movie. Did you know that? I'm not surprised, but...
I've seen the trailers, and again, it looks so dumb that it actually... I was on the fence about trying to watch the first 3 so I can watch that one.
I couldn't get past the fact they replaced the letter A with a 4.
I just saw the part where, or the only thing that sticks out to me is the part where Jason Statham gets kicked back, and there's like railings next to him, and he's holding a pair of knives, and he slows himself down by grinding the knives against the railings as he's sliding back, and there's sparks flying everywhere.
Those comic book movies are so dumb. I watched Sausage Party from 2016 because there was literally nothing else to watch.
I mean, I would rather have killed myself than be forced to watch that.
And I'll tell you what, that would have been the correct decision. This is that movie about animated food with a bunch of dick jokes that was made by Seth Rogen, Evan Goldberg, and Jonah Hill. It's an excuse to say the raunchiest things possible as many times as possible in as short a time as possible by as many characters as possible. It completely lost itself in all forms of subtlety by dropping and at least 1,000 times. It quickly became obvious there was going to be no refinement whatsoever for this entire movie. The only part I found genuinely funny was within the first 10 minutes, which was a 30-second segment that mimicked Saving Private Ryan.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it. So the funniest part was when it was talking about another movie, and again, it was in the first 10 minutes, and it was 30 seconds out of an hour and a half. The rest was just f***ing terrible. It could have been a good movie if the creators had managed to keep their dicks in their pants and practice any sort of actual humor, because just saying the word 15 times per minute does not equal humor. And the whole thing culminates in all of the characters in the movie all having sex with each other for 8 minutes.
Are you serious?
I am serious, and it is even dumber than it sounds. The movie was not funny. Stupid does not equal funny.
Gonna look up reviews on IMDb real quick.
I'm sure there are people giving it 10 stars saying this is the funniest movie they have ever seen in their entire life. And then at the bottom, it probably has a disclaimer saying this person is 8 years old.
The first featured review says vulgar, crass, and incredibly funny. 9 out of 10. A graphic religious allegory? Is that right?
No, what?
I don't know, that's what it says.
You could tell the 3 people making this movie were cracking themselves up, and they made it for themselves, and they are apparently 12 years old, because a 12-year-old would find this movie hilarious just because it's so vulgar. And from what I gather, Rogen, Goldberg, and Hill had full control over pretty much everything, so this movie is their humor unfiltered, which is unsurprisingly extremely shallow and stupid.
Okay, well, here's one you might agree with. 1 out of 10, was this written by a 40-year-old virgin? And another 1 out of 10, swearing, and more swearing is the title.
It was exhausting. It was such a waste of time. If I could do anything with a time machine to better the world, the history of mankind, I would eliminate this movie. The shock value, which was clearly what this movie was going for, was gone after the first 25 seconds. And now I've wasted even more time just talking about it, but maybe it will prevent people from watching it. Do not watch it. I watched this documentary about Jimmy MacDonald, which was really cool. He was the original head of Disney's sound effects department, and the second voice of Mickey Mouse after Walt Disney smoked too much.
Oh boy.
That was surprisingly good.
I know.
Stop. It was super cool how he created all of this stuff for the Foley work. And it was interesting how little sound effects were considered at the time, and they were definitely an afterthought. And apparently all the studios filled these early roles with drummers because drummers already had a bunch of stuff to hit together, and the studio did not have anything like that. He seemed like a guy who was really focused on his work, and he really enjoyed doing the work and just enjoyed inventing things, and he could have gone on forever talking about it, which in certain settings would work, like if you could just sit down with him and let him talk without a time limit. But there was a period when he was doing interviews outside of Disney, and he was already older, and it didn't really work because he gets cut off a lot of the time because he's not as dynamic as other interviewees for primetime. Like there was this Letterman interview where he was trying to show stuff and trying to talk about it, but Letterman is a dick to begin with.
I was going to say that sounds like something that Letterman would ruin.
Yeah, it's like, why would he even have him on there in the first place? But whatever.
Letterman is an ass.
True. But the documentary was cool. I read The Essential X Factor Volume 2.
I remember liking this one a lot.
Yeah, this one picked up a little bit in terms of story and kind of did a little more balancing of what X Factor is actually doing behind the scenes as opposed to the first volume where the writers were trying to wrestle with the whole purpose of X Factor. Because I think we talked about that, how it doesn't really make sense.
Yeah.
So a lot of this one takes place not dealing with X Factor's intended purpose and in completely different locations. So this is the one where Iceman runs into Loki, who captures him and overloads him so he can't control his ice powers. So he has to wear this big dumb belt to keep himself in control.
Okay, I must have forgotten about that. I don't remember that.
Yeah, so he walks around and pretty much from here on out with this huge chunky belt. It takes up most of his midsection. It's not even a belt. It's more of like a shirt with a top cut off.
Okay.
There's a ton more drama between Gene and Scott and what he wants to do, and Madeline's in there, and that's just as tiring as it was because they change their mind every 15 seconds.
Yeah, that definitely never really worked.
And when one of them commits to something, that's right at the point when the other one says, I don't agree. I've decided to change my mind. This is when Apocalypse shows up with his 4 horsemen, including Angel, who lost his wings. They had to be amputated.
That must have been in the spin-off show. I don't remember that part.
So then he kills himself, but right before death, Apocalypse picks him up, and he says, oh, I got your joke. Yeah, that's not funny.
I was trying to put it in there earlier, but you kept talking, so...
But Apocalypse picks him up, and he says, I'll give you your wings back. And Angel says, okay. And that's when he gets transformed into his blue self, and his wings are all knives with neurotoxin or something. There's a lot of X Factor raising the kids and the dynamic with that, and Caliban is there, and he starts towards his path to becoming evil, but he never really feels like a threat, even when he does become evil. Even though Apocalypse says Caliban is his ace in the hole, he never really feels like that. Cameron Hodge also starts revealing his true colors as an asshole, and there's this arc with Infectia. Do you remember her?
No. It sounds very 90s.
Maybe it's Infectia. I don't know how she pronounced it because it's in writing. And she kisses people and alters their genetic structures and boosts their power. And these are regular people, not mutants. But if they turn up their power too much because they have unlimited control to it, then they turn into monsters and eventually explode. And every time they do that, she's like, now I got to do it all over again. So most of them explode. And she sets her sights on mutants because she wants to know what will happen with that. And of course, it's X Factor and it's Iceman in particular. And there's this whole issue where the X Factor kids keep preventing her from kissing Iceman.
I don't know how I couldn't remember this. This sounds ridiculous.
And it's not just the X Factor kids. After they beat Apocalypse, they get his ship, which they call Ship. So it's also helping the kids do it. It felt like a freaking 90s John Hughes movie. So eventually she ends up kissing a mutant, but it's Beast, not Iceman. and that changes him back into his blue form.
Okay.
But it also makes him stronger than ever, but at the expense of his intelligence. So he's gradually getting stronger but dumber, which was an interesting character arc for him. They actually did good work with that. And then I went on to Essential X Factor Volume 3, and Apocalypse is still around. Obviously, they beat Apocalypse, but he's still chilling. And he has this whole conversation with the High Evolutionary while everyone is fighting these mole men underground or something. And they're comparing their methods and their mindsets, which is kind of interesting, but then eventually turned into a dick measuring contest. And then they left, each one saying, yeah, I could have killed you if I wanted to. And then it goes into the Inferno stuff, which I talked about in whatever Essential X-Men volume that was. So I'm not going to talk about that again here. That was a big chunk of this volume. And then there was this weird arc after that with trolls looking for gold. And they all spoke in rhymes. It was weird and didn't have anything to do with anything. And then at the end, the ship takes them to this planet with two fighting factions. One that look like humans, the other one that looks like monsters. And the team lands and the humans go with the humans and, Beast goes with the monsters. And there's a lot of character growth in there. And eventually they have to unite the planet to repel the Celestials before the Celestials destroy the planet. So that was pretty interesting. And then at the very end, Apocalypse bumps into Loki, because I guess that's a theme, where Apocalypse just bumps into a bunch of other powerful people. And he does the same thing as with the High Evolutionary. They just fight each other and have a dick measuring contest, and at the end they both leave saying, I could have killed you if I wanted to. And I played Pikmin 4, which is a game I have been looking forward to so much. I was kind of disappointed. Because the Switch is so popular, when Nintendo makes games, they have to cater towards a wider audience, which means making things more accessible, which I understand. Pikmin 3 was on the Wii U, which was not very popular, so I felt like Nintendo developing that game said, we have less constraints here, we can kind of do more of whatever we want, because we're not catering to so many people and have to do a lowest common denominator type thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you're going to have more of just the hardcore Nintendo people buying the Wii U.
Yeah. So for Pikmin 4, there were a lot of decisions made that I felt were bad and went in the wrong direction for this series. Some were huge, some were small. So one of them was limiting the amount of Pikmin you can have in the field. So traditionally it's been 100. Once you get 100, that's it. But in this one, it starts at 10 and you have to earn having more on the field, which was incredibly frustrating. I get it if you haven't played a game from this series before, but putting that limitation on everybody was very frustrating.
You sure there wasn't something like that in the first one?
I'm sure.
Okay.
The first one, like when you started the first day, there were only that many in that area to complete that first day. The first day was like a tutorial day.
Yeah.
Like you could not get more than 25 on that first day. But starting at the second day, you could get up to 100 just by going and killing stuff and bringing pellets back. And by earning more in Pikmin 4, it's only 10 at a time. And it happens so gradually. I was just annoyed. This one really pushes multitasking at every turn, like to the point where characters are talking about it out loud. And they call it Dandori. Is that a real word in Japan?
Not that I know of, but it easily could be for all I know.
But the ironic part is that Pikmin 3 had so much more of that, and it was way more complex, and they did not push it in your face. You just had to do it. That's just the way the game was. Another limitation that bothered me was limiting the types of Pikmin that can be in the field at the same time. It was 3. So you can have red, yellow, and blue, or you can have red, yellow, and rock, or you can have yellow, ice, and rock. I really liked Pikmin 3 because the multitasking was so complex that you could pull out however many you needed. So, like, I need 3 pink, and I want 20 red, and I want 10 yellow, and I want 15 blue, and I want the rest to be rock. That was great, because then you could split up and multitask, because you had 3 playable characters that could go to 3 different spots, and they could each take their parties and do whatever they wanted to do. It was great. But in this one, you can only have 3 types on the field at a time. And they had 3 captains in Pikmin 3, so 3 characters you could switch between and have them do some automated stuff while you were doing manual stuff with another one and just kind of bounce back and forth. It was awesome. And the only split in this one is between your character and the dog thing, which they call Ochi. And that was nice, but the fact that your character and the dog do not have the same abilities was pretty annoying, because the game encourages you to split up, take different Pikmin with each leader, But having one party encounter something that they can't do and being forced to go somewhere else while you bring the other party to that location is a waste of time, which again, the game tells you over and over again, do not waste time, but it forces you to waste time. I didn't like that. There were good things though, as well. I'm just a little irritated that this game wasn't what I wanted it to be. There was a lot of enemy variety, including some enemies that hadn't been around since the first game, which was really cool, seeing some of that legacy stuff in a new context. And I had a little advantage in already knowing how to defeat some of the stuff as soon as I saw it, because I'd done it before. And there were other times when you'd see that one thing in the distance and you just go, oh, f*** that thing. I hate that thing. Pikmin 4 is a modern take on Pikmin 2, which regularly gets a lot of praise as being the best game out of the first three, which is wrong. It is not. 1 had the base concept. It had the idea. It was really compact. It felt great. And you could tell they had all of these ideas that they did not implement because they either couldn't figure out how, or they didn't have enough time, or they felt it wouldn't fit. And then 2 came out, and they said, we just shoved in every idea we ever had into this one, even the ones that we probably should not have. 2 felt extremely bloated. It had too many elements that felt useless. And Pikmin 4 fell into all the same traps that 2 did. There was a bunch of stuff that I never even touched because there was no point. It didn't give me an advantage, and in fact felt like it was holding me back to use those things. And once you rescue Captain Olimar, because that's like a recurring thing in this series, you can talk to him and get this little whole mini game within a game of him talking about his experience. And something that was weird was that this game completely retconned the whole first and second game. I thought that was a mistake. So Olimar says, hey, let me tell you about what happened when I first came here. And you kind of play through a mini version of the first game, which could have been really, really, really good. But it forces you to play on the stages from 4, and it feels like a half-assed attempt because you got to collect the 30 ship parts just like in the first one. But in the first one, all 30 ship parts were unique. And in this one, you're collecting 5 parts. You're collecting like 10 times each or something. It was really dumb. It almost would have been better if they had done this as DLC and actually made it a full game within the game. The 2 new Pikmin types in Pikmin 4 are Ice, which can freeze enemies by latching onto them, and they can freeze pools of water so everyone can run across them, which was cool. Oh, you can also ride the dog with all of the Pikmin so that he can swim across and no one can drown, which was cool. And the ice ones, by the end, didn't really live up to the potential. Like when the rock ones and the flying ones were introduced in 3, there were a lot more use cases for them. In 4, with the ice ones, I was mostly using them just to freeze the water so I could walk across it. If you froze an enemy, they could not attack, which was good, but if you killed them, they shattered, so you couldn't take their bodies and convert it to resources. This game is dark as hell, in case anyone doesn't know. Like, this whole series is terrible in terms of, like, what's actually happening, but it, like, plays it up as, like, look how colorful and shit. And this is also the first game that lets you explore at night, and it introduces glow Pikmin. And these stages were cool. They were much faster paced. It was like a speedrun tower defense minigame, and I really enjoyed them. That was one of the elements to this one I felt really moved in the right direction. The biggest offender to this game was completely removing full motion controls. 1 and 2 were originally on GameCube, and they used a controller. And then years later, when the Wii came out, they re-released them, but with motion controls, so the Wii Remote and the Nunchuck. I remember seeing the first one in a store for the Wii. And I asked the person, I was like, is this a different game? Like, what is this? And he said, I think they just remade it, but you can use the remote. And I was like, that seems pointless, but I bought it. And then I played it, and I was like, this is how these games were meant to be played. It was such a paradigm shift, and it was so good. I even played through the second one again, even though I didn't really like it as much, with that remote. And then 3 came out on the Wii U, and it also had that option. And they had the controller option too. So you could do it either way. Even 3, when it was ported to the Switch as Pikmin 3 Deluxe, had the option to do motion controls. And it used gyro because there was no sensor anymore. And you had to push a calibration button once in a while, but it was great. Removing that option entirely from Pikmin 4 was a huge mistake, and it pissed me off more than anything else about this game. And the whole time I was thinking, man, I wish I could just use the remote. And I'm not a huge fan of motion controls in general for games. I usually turn it off. The only motion control option is when you're holding the button to throw a Pikmin, then you can use motion controls for where it goes, which seems completely pointless because you're not really ever doing that. And it's a middle finger because it's saying, yeah, we could have put in motion controls and here it is like 1%. F*** you. And they put Pikmin 1 and 2 on Switch also. And they removed the motion controls from that too. They already exist. They're already in 1 and 2 on the Wii. And to pull those out seems like 2 middle fingers. Maybe it was because if they had left it in, people would say, why doesn't 4 have this? Because it would make it way better. And I was looking through the options. I was going on Reddit and shit. I was looking to try and find how to turn on motion controls. And then I figured out you can't. To compensate, they introduced a very robust lock-on system. So if your cursor gets within 1 nautical mile of something, it's going to lock on. And I guess it worked, but I was fighting with it at times, especially when shit was close together. It was a little frustrating. And here's the thing, when it had motion controls in 3, you had a lock-on button, so it's not like there wasn't a lock-on before. Again, a step in the wrong direction. Something else that really bothered me was when you kill an enemy and do whatever you do with them, they are gone permanently. Part of the replayability of the earlier installments was that enemies respawn. If you leave an area and come back a few days later, they're back. And then sometimes, as you get later into the game, different and more difficult enemies respawn. So it adds more variety to the replayability and additional challenges. And in Pikmin 4, once you clear out an area, that is it. You can go back, but it's very sterile and void of life, which is ironic considering this game is exploring the beauty of natural areas.
And killing what you find there.
Yeah, I want to kill more stuff. I mean, there were times in the earlier ones where I would spend a whole in-game day raising Pikmin. That was the point of me going to that area. I wanted to kill a bunch of stuff. I wanted to bring a bunch of stuff back. I wanted to just grow my Pikmin. But in this one, you can't. So pretty much whatever you grow is it. They put in the Dandori battles and challenges. The battles are competing with a computer character to bring more things back to your ship than them in this standalone dedicated area. And the Dandori challenges are putting you on a stage with stuff spread out all over the place, and you have to get as much back as you can in the time limit. 3 had both of these things. 4 decided to put them as part of the main story, which was interesting because in 3 they were bonus modes. And they were much more difficult in 3, especially some of those later ones. Like I was getting platinum medals like nothing in 4. It was too easy. Even the hard ones were not that difficult. I had to do them maybe twice before I got a platinum. Whereas in 3 I'm still fighting to get freaking silver in some of them. And the multiplayer. What the fuck? What the ever-loving fuck? The multiplayer in Pikmin 3 was so good. There was this whole thing. Nintendo used to have these treehouse streams where they would talk about games that were coming out, and Miyamoto was actually at one of them before Pikmin 3 came out. And he was talking about it, and he sat down with Bill Trinan, and he was like, we're going to play this multiplayer mode to show you. And they did it. They dedicated this whole time to showing this whole battle thing. And at the end, he was practically on his knees. He was begging people. He was like, please, play this multiplayer mode. It is so good. And then the game came out, and I played the multiplayer mode, and then I was on my knees going, oh my god, this game is so good. Like, he was right. He knew what he was talking about. Pikmin 4's multiplayer is just a Dandori battle with 5 meager-ass stages, and you just try and collect more shit than your opponent. And you can only have one type of Pikmin. It's extremely limited in every way. It feels like an afterthought. It almost would have been better if they didn't have it in it at all. And when they announced multiplayer in Pikmin 3 and said, you can also do multiplayer in the story mode, I screamed, yes, really loud. And the cops had to be called and everything.
I remember hearing about that on the news.
Yeah, it was nationwide. And then when they found out why it was, everybody was like, oh, and all charges were dropped because everyone was excited. And they pulled that out of this one, even though you can still split. So the only multiplayer, again, it's just this middle finger, is player 1 is actually playing the game, and player 2 does this Super Mario Galaxy thing where they just have this little reticle on the screen and they can throw rocks by pushing a button, which is so stupid. It's basically like telling your little sibling, that's you. I'm going to play the game, but I don't want you crying that you're not playing the game, so that's you. So overall, Nintendo made too many concessions with this one to make it more approachable. I'm not saying it's a bad game, but knowing what came before and how many excellent features were removed, this one takes the series in the wrong direction. And I say this having played 1 and 2 on the GameCube, 1 and 2 on the Wii, 1 and 2 on the Switch, 3 on the Wii U, 3 on the Switch, and 4. In my opinion, the best one and the best environment is 3 on the Wii U, which I understand is difficult for people to obtain and play now. But if you have the opportunity, you should do it. So that's my Pikmin rant. That's all I played this month because I was so excited for this game. And I 100%ed everything begrudgingly. And I'm going to go back and play 3 again probably. Because I know on the Switch, when they did Deluxe, there are different difficulty modes. And there's easy, normal, and hard or something like that. Or like normal, hard, and spicy. I can't remember what it is. And I said, well, I played it on the Wii U, so I'm going to do hard. But as I was playing it, I was like, this feels pretty much the same. And then I did some research, and the hard mode on the Switch is actually the regular mode on the Wii U. So they kind of dumbed it down. So if you play normal mode on the Switch, it's actually easier than it's ever been before. So the actual hard mode is spicy, which is cool, because that limits your Pikmin from 100 to 60. So it provides an actual additional challenge by almost cutting your force in half. So yeah. That's all I did this month.
Thanks, everyone, for watching or listening. As of this recording, we are about to hit 6,000 subscribers.
Thanks to all those bots.
And join us again next month for more rambling about inane things.
I'll talk about Pikmin 4 again if you want.
No, thank you.